Welcome to the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast. I'm David Haugh from 670 The Score and the Mully and Haugh Show. Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune covers the Bears the day after the worst season in Bears history, statistically at least. 3-14 set a record for losses. Dan was up at Halas Hall as players were cleaning out their lockers. We've got a lot to get to today, including a special guest that we will welcome shortly, Dan. But how was the day after the worst ever?
Yeah, well, locker cleanout day up there in Lake Forest. And there was a day where locker cleanout day used to be a meaningful event. As a reporter, you were able to talk to a much wider volume of guys in the locker room than you are in the way it is now and how controlled it is. There was injured players that we were hoping to get a chance to speak with today that we didn't get a chance to. Eddie Jackson walked across the locker room. We said, Eddie, can we grab you for a second? He said, they told me not to talk until I'm 100% healed. And we said, we miss you, though. He's like, I miss you, too, but I'll catch you next year. I promise you I'll be back here next year. So Eddie's future is secure for 2023. He will talk to us at some point. But there were some things to gain. We heard from Justin Fields today. We heard from Justin Jones, which some things that I'll bring up later in the podcast in terms of the word grievance that he used and some of the things that players expressed to coaches during their exit interviews, which is at least worth touching on as we turn the page into the 2023 offseason. But that's it. The locker room's closed. And then the big day, obviously, is Tuesday with your general manager, Ryan Poles, addressing the entire media and the city with kind of his state of the team address.
Oh, I'm well aware and familiar with the word grievance, and we both have heard our share in the last 24 hours especially. But we will get to all that in just a few housekeeping things. We will drop a special podcast episode after Ryan Poles talks on Tuesday. So that will be Wednesday morning. And again, regularly scheduled later in the week on Friday. And we'll go take the off season as it comes to us here on the Take the North pod, where you can get on your free Odyssey app, wherever you get your podcasts, or on the YouTube channel, 670 Scores YouTube channel. Check us out. You can watch, you can listen, download it, and subscribe. All right. Now, yesterday, where you wanted to be was where we were watching on the TV screen in the Halas Hall press box, but it was Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. Colts, and they were trying to protect the lead against the Texans. The Houston Texans, led by Lovie Smith, come storming back, 4th and 20, and they have a 28-yard touchdown pass from Davis Mills to remind me of the receiver. Again, all I remember is
Jordan Akins, tight end.
Yeah, tight end. And it should have been intercepted, but the Texans beat the Colts in the desperation heave, and it puts the Bears in the number 1 overall draft slot.
The 2022 season for the Chicago Bears was all about measuring growth and progress, right? We are also measuring growth and progress on the Take the North podcast. And we've come so far as a podcast, David, that we have enough resources to have a correspondent at Lucas Oil Stadium to monitor whether the Colts and the Texans could lose the AFC South Tailspin Bowl and how it would affect the Bears. Look at this guy. Rich Campbell was there in his hometown, his new hometown of Indianapolis, to take in that game, and he's going to set the scene for us.
Welcome, Rich.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I was in section 102 there at Lucas Oil Stadium yesterday for the thrilling conclusion of the Texans and Colts season. The little pennant just said NFL draft on it, because you know what the stakes were. I was thinking of you guys in Chicago, understanding that if the Texans happened to jump up and snatch that win against a Colts team with an equal incentive to lose, then maybe the Bears would fall into that number 1 pick. So you guys have quite an offseason to cover up there as the Bears contemplate trading out. But to be there for the Colts and Texans to sort out that tankathon was really something.
Rich, you and I have talked offline, obviously, over the years about what an offseason is like. You know, the 3 of the last 4 years, the Bears haven't even had a first-round pick, much less a top 10 pick, much less the number 1 overall pick. There's been years in free agency where you're just kind of trying to figure out, which Bobby Massey or Taylor Gabriel or Allen Robinson are you going to wind up with, when they come to the podium. This is a different animal for us in 2023. But go back to Sunday and tell us kind of what the mood was like in that building for a game that was pairing 2 completely dysfunctional teams that were trying to figure out who could come unraveled the most, the fastest.
Well, yeah, well, you said it. I mean, all of us over the years have covered our share of meaningless Week 17, Week 18 finales where you just go through the motions and everyone shows up and puts on their NFL jersey and helmet, but you just find it's so hollow, right? And that's exactly the feeling that it was. But I got to take my son. This is my son, is almost 5 years old, and when a game of such magnitude comes across and tickets are available, you might be able to get him in for a first game. And he ended up staying the whole time, so we got to see the end. The sort of the dullness, right? There's no juice on third down. Even the downs, like the noisemakers go off, and you kind of say, but as the game went on, guys, tanking is this concept, and you always consider it with these types of seasons. But you're getting into this game, and you're like, okay, both teams have 3 turnovers in this game. The Colts turned the ball over on their first touch of the game. Both teams returned interceptions for touchdowns. I mean, it became almost comedic. And the Colts were trailing for so long. They have their problems of their own. I mean, both of those teams I was watching yesterday, if they don't have revamped operations just like the Bears, on-field product, you got problems. And so, yeah, the atmosphere was what you would think it would be. Although I will say this, in support of a domed stadium, I would put it at about 90% capacity yesterday. Couldn't believe how many people actually showed up. But there was no juice, of course.
I'm all for the dome stadiums. I just have to find $2.2 billion laying around the basement floor. Rich, so I think that obviously the Texans coming back was the ideal scenario for people in Chicago watching the game. I think at one point in time there might have been a brief discussion as this was unfolding, like, well, do you think Lovey will go for 2? Was there any doubt, do you think, in the crowd as you sat there watching, that if the Texans scored and they were down 31-30, that Lovey would decide to go for 2 and obviously win a game that most people in his organization would prefer they lose?
Yeah, I think you start to do the math and the time's running down even before they hit the prayer touchdown on 4th and 20. You're thinking, if they were to go down and tie this, I mean, we're going to get overtime in this game. No way. All right, he's going to go for 2. And that's where I think, if we want to talk about tanking for a second, I don't ever think any NFL coaching staff, tells their guys to lose. I don't think they talk about losing or intentionally or any of that. But I do think it's a systemic decision-making process. For example, okay, we're going to go hire an interim head coach who has no experience, and the worst case scenario is we improve our draft status. We're going to go ahead and trade our all-pro middle linebacker and anybody else who can rush the passer for us. And the worst case scenario is we end up with the number 1 pick. It starts to be that other side of the coin. And so you could parse that thinking into micro decisions. Hey, we're going to go for 2. What's the worst that could happen? We get sacked. We turn the ball over. We have some kind of incompetent play like we do on every play, or we've had on so many plays today. And they happen to convert. The Colts defense was shambolic on both. It was astounding. And in the building, when Akins caught the ball, and then when the Texans went for 2 and got it, you could see people in the stadium just start to realize, the initial reaction when anyone scores against your team, oh, shoot. And then the realization was almost immediate. But hey, the Colts now have the 4th draft pick in the draft. I mean, they were thinking along the same lines of the Bears there, that there was a major upside to losing that game. Now the Colts are in a pretty good position to get a quarterback that could potentially reverse the course of their franchise right here. So yeah, no thought that they would kick and go to OT, although it just would have continued, right? The absurdity. Who could make the next mistake? Maybe
the Colts will be on the phone with Bears general manager Ryan Poles and try to move from 4-1 to get the guy they want and have a chance to leapfrog a division rival to do so. I'm curious, from the vantage point that you were watching the 4th and 20 play from, what did that look like inside the stadium? Because on TV, you watch this kind of helter-skelter play unfold and the ball be thrown up and you're like, oh, well, that's picked off. It's at least going to be knocked out. Oh, my God, the dude just scored a touchdown.
Yeah, so where I was sitting was 29 rows from the end zone, but it was on the other side of the field. So when the ball is down at the other side, if you ever sat that low for a football game, your depth perception is poor. But also, I was trying to explain to my son that the Colts were about to win. Like it's going to be one play, and they're going to win, and then everybody is going to be very happy. And so you can scream, and And he was excited, and he's wearing his little Colts shirt, and he said, all right, the Colts are going to win. And I had to just explain to him, no, buddy, I can't really explain to you how improbable that was and how ridiculous that was. But okay, hey, there's one more play. All right, if they can stop them here. And then they come out for the 2-point conversion, and it was the disappointment all over again. All I saw from my vantage point was chaos. I mean, the Colts dropped 7 on that play. They just rushed with 4. And they still managed to collapse the pocket.
Yeah.
Davis Mills creates time, throws a 46-yard lob off his back foot, and the defense was just worse. I mean, the defense was horrible. I thought it was intercepted from the angle I had. I thought the Colts had picked it off and were coming.
David has given out the name of that Yale graduate Colts defensive back about 150 times this morning, just so people know.
Thank you. Did you notice that, Dan? Thanks for listening. I did.
They could start, make his GoFundMe go viral here. Some thank yous from Chicago on down.
Rich, if he catches that ball, it's a much different Monday in Chicago. It's a much different offseason. And you know what? He should have caught that. I love the story. Look, I know he was Damar Hamlin's college buddy, and they go way back. He got a pick early in the game, and he went and he made the tribute. I'm all for that. The guy missed a pick that was a gimme. He should have caught it right there.
It was you can't be a professional and miss that play. But here's the thing, just to the same point you guys are making about the Bears' fortune there. He helped out the Colts. The Broncos ended up winning, and the Colts slid another spot down. Dan, I saw, I believe it's Pro Football Focus's Black Monday mock draft. Indeed, has the Colts trading up the number 1 with the Bears, getting Bryce Young, and you can have all these mock drafts from here until the commissioner puts the Bears on the clock. But
hold on, man. If you must really miss it. If you got a Black Monday mock draft that you're already tapping into, you must really miss the beat.
Well, I do miss it. So there's that. That's a given. But I'm interested to see here what the Colts are going to do at quarterback. And Dan, kind of to your point about what the offseason is. Yeah, we've had off seasons. We had off seasons where you're wondering about Taylor Gabriel, Bobby Massey. Those are great polls, by the way. But there's no intrigue like quarterback intrigue in an offseason. And they've got it in Indianapolis. And David, you make a great point as well that they also have it in Houston. And those 2 quarterbacks potentially drafted 2nd and 4th if they were to stay where they are. They're going to play for 10 years against each other. It's a really interesting AFC South storyline, and the Bears are right in the thick of it because they can sell that number 1 pick to the highest bidder. They're in a nice little spot.
So, Rich, we don't want to keep you all day, but I do want to get your thoughts. And Dan, yours too here, as 2 guys who have covered the league for a long time. And it is fun to consider where the Bears are. And I do think we shouldn't dismiss how they got here. Rich makes some good points about the Colts. And was it de facto tanking by hiring Jeff Saturday to coach them the rest of the season after they gave up on Frank Reich? You could look at the Texans. The most surprised person in the building, in the organization, might have been their owner when Lovie Smith decided to go for 2. In some ways, hiring him to be a 1-year Band-Aid was tanking, was losing by design. And we know what the Bears did in terms of trading everybody and shedding payroll and tearing it down to build it back up. Does the NFL have an issue they need to address because of all this intentional losing? I can rail about it on the radio. I can be misquoted and whatever. We could all have this debate and argue about it, but I don't think it matters. Does the league care if teams are going into a season or finishing seasons designing their Sundays to finish with losses?
What do you think, Dan?
Well, look, I thought that there were a lot of elements of Week 18 Sunday that were just silly. I think the game that we sat through at Soldier Field was silly. I mean, it was, the Bears ran out Nathan Peterman and Tim Boyle to throw every pass of a regular season finale and had nobody in their defensive backfield who had played more than 20 snaps all season. So it was just a very weird day. And just the designed losing it's a little strange. I in all sports, I would love to have a different way of going about it and have, some form of, this many teams gets in a lottery, this many teams does this, does that. Or like we do it in the fantasy football consolation bracket, you take the best of the worst teams, right? And you give them the number 1 pick. And so then that incentivizes some actual success out of maybe it's the bottom 8 teams, you take the best and you give them the number 1.
Yeah, there's a lot of intrigue yesterday about who's going to end up with the number 1 pick or the best possible draft spot, depending on who your team is, and the league appreciates that. They like the intrigue at the bottom of the standings, but is it the right type? Yeah, I mean, I think it's off-putting in several ways. I want to be careful in using the term tanking. I'm kind of joking around, because what one person calls tanking, another person could call rebuilding, or
Sure.
just making sure youth gets a run. I mean, the nature of the sport also plays into it. For example, Justin Fields sitting out yesterday. It's not like baseball, where the risk of injury is different. So it makes all the sense in the world to sit Justin Fields for a final game so he doesn't get hurt, because the likelihood that he will is so much higher. And so I think the NFL does have an issue, and you saw baseball has now gone to a lottery for the first time in its history. They just had their first lottery a couple weeks ago. I think it wouldn't surprise me at all if the NFL did it in the future. The other part of this equation that I think is interesting is the expanded playoff field. I believe you have one team in each conference that didn't make the playoffs that's above 500. I mean, so basically all you have to be is 500.
Yeah.
I mean, basically 500 anymore to make the playoffs.
Right.
All this intrigue yesterday over the 7th team in. Okay. And they get the doors blown off by the 2 seed. I mean, the NFL's gone through this over the generations as they've expanded the playoffs from 5 to 6 to 7 teams. But that watering down of the playoff, the first round of the playoffs, plus the caliber or lack thereof on the bottom end of the standings, I think there's a lot to think about there.
Well, the Chicago Bears were the first ever number 7 seed in NFC playoff history, and then they went to New Orleans and didn't score a touchdown until the final play of the game, with Nickelodeon slime most valuable player Mitch Trubisky hitting Jimmy Graham, and that was a microcosm of what it's like to be the number 7 seed in a conference a lot of times. David, one of the reasons I bring Rich on is several times in this little visit here, he said great points. You and I need to hear that every once in a while. Somebody to tell us that we're making great points, somebody that has a lucid train of thought to back some of this up. So it's great to have that. Rich, I also wanted to share this anecdote before you leave, because yesterday was so not serious from the football that we were watching that the press box chicanery was to a level that you would have appreciated had you been to the right of me in that press box. And at one point in the fourth quarter of Bears-Vikings, Larry Mayer from ChicagoBears.com was in the back of the press box by himself. I mean, like fully immersed in Texans-Colts and getting just emotional with every play. And Pat Finley took a picture and he said, I don't know if can I post this to Twitter or not to mark this very historic moment, right, for the Chicago Bears franchise. How better to mark it than to have Larry Mayer watching the TVs at the Soldier Field press box. And I just told Pat, I said, this photo that you've taken is NSFW because of Larry's arousal in this Texans-Colts game. So.
Well, in Larry's defense, man, no intrigue like quarterback intrigue and draft intrigue and offseason. I mean, that you can write. I mean, whether you want to write the Bears have the number 1 pick, you can write from now until the rest of the time, the Bears were the worst team in the NFL.
Yep.
You don't have to waste any words. They're the worst team in the NFL. And man, they've got a lot to build. I mean, you don't just turn that around in 1 year when you're 3-14. You've got a lot of holes to fill, and even the guys that come back, starting with the quarterback, they've got to improve in the context of it all. And there's so much that goes into that. It's not just a draft and free agency. You change the names on the backs of the jerseys, and suddenly you're a 10-win team. It just doesn't work like that. They've got a lot to do.
That's a weird thing to say.
Great point.
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate your time. Keep in touch,
buddy.
and we'll come back to you, because I think the Bears and the Colts might be doing some business down the road. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.
You got it, guys. Thanks for having me. Be good.
Rich Campbell, the former beat writer for the Chicago Tribune, good friend of the show, and now Hoosier resident. So he is our Indianapolis correspondent. All right, Dan. So enough with the Colts and the Texans and what it means to the Bears. The Bears cleaned out their lockers today. Justin Fields had a chance to speak to reporters, was not at the podium, was surrounded at his locker, had a lot of interesting things to say. Nothing earth-shattering unless I missed something off camera. But what would your description be of the way Justin Fields said goodbye and went into the offseason?
Yeah, he said goodbye in front of a horde of about 65 media members, cameras, microphones, reporters. Everyone slammed around his little locker cubicle. We had to wait for a couple minutes while he finished his sandwich. And so if you want an awkward situation, you've got 60 people surrounded around the star quarterback watching him eat a sandwich before he can give his final words before heading into the offseason. Justin, I thought, was pretty candid on a lot of topics. The first one, he was asked about not having the opportunity to pursue the single-season quarterback rushing record that Lamar Jackson set and said, yeah, obviously I'm a little disappointed, but ultimately up the road, I would like to set passing records. And that was a nice acknowledgement of where he wants his career to go, who he believes himself to be as a quarterback, and what the Bears face as they continue to try to develop him into not only just a reliable playmaking starter, but into a championship fueling star. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in a bit, because I think that's an important topic to discuss. I think the other part of this is there was an acknowledgement of his relationship with Luke Getsy. And I've said forever that Luke is lucky to have Justin, and Justin is lucky to have Luke, and the Bears are lucky to have them both, because they've developed a connection in year one that will allow them to approach the second season together in a very productive manner. Justin is a guy who likes to be coached hard. Luke is a guy who doesn't sugarcoat anything. And so the productivity that creates in a relationship of a leader and a student, and all the things that go with that, having the opportunity to make the maximum progress possible is there. And that trust, David, I don't think you can understate or overstate how valuable that level of trust between those two guys is at this point, because we saw very recently in recent history with the Bears that once that trust erodes, you're in a really, really dangerous zone. And I think the Bears are going to be able to avoid that, because that there is this bond and this connection and this ability to talk openly, honestly, and candidly about what the offense looks like, what it should look like, and where it needs to go.
Where do you think he was in terms of understanding what comes next, in terms of the rhetoric and the conversation about drafting first overall, the availability of quarterbacks, and the Bears' belief in him?
In terms of his headspace?
Yeah.
Look, obviously he's going to
Did he address it? Was he asked directly about how much he needs to hear from Ryan Poles in terms of the Bears' belief in him, or whether or not he questions that confidence in him?
He was not asked specifically about that. He was asked about the comments Andrew Janocko made about him last week, about his desire to own the city and own this team. And he said, look, I feel like I already do own it, that people in this building, and particularly my teammates, know how hard I work. They know what I'm about. They know what I'm invested in trying to accomplish. And so that gives, a level of infectious belief in the room. And so Justin, I think he's always has been very confident in himself and who he is and what it means. Look, like Tuesday is going to be a significant day publicly for what the general manager says about his quarterback in that press conference. I'm also not of the belief that the general manager has to play some subterfuge game to try to drum up interest in the number one pick, because I believe that when you have the number one pick as opposed to the number two pick, you can hold an auction, because all it takes is two teams that are interested in Bryce Young, and now you control that. You don't have another team ahead of you playing that game with the puppeteer strings. And so I think that there is almost a level of honesty that the Bears are allowed at this point, because all it takes is two interested teams to come up there, and you don't have to trick the rest of the league into believing that you're drafting a quarterback if you truly believe in your guy. And so that's where it's going to be. Look, like, as well as I do, that it's about listening to the words that Ryan Poles speaks. It's about watching his body language. It's about hearing the things he doesn't say and trying to interpret what it all means, because I think there's going to be 3 months of wild, wide-ranging speculation about the future of this quarterback.
Yeah, you know what? I hope you're right, because I don't like the games, and I think it's disingenuous to project one thing if you believe another, and that may be part of being a pro sports executive these days. But if Ryan Poles went to the podium on Tuesday and declares his undying love and commitment to Justin Fields as a franchise, then it will be somewhat of a relief, because
and there'd be little harm in it, I don't think.
Well, I don't know that, Dan, because I think that to whatever degree, I don't think there would be any harm either, but I don't want to be naive about it either, because I think that when you see these guys that they publicly say one thing and they believe another, you wonder if it is there is that lying season right before the draft, where there's guys that are misled and leaks that are intended to deceive teams into thinking you're doing one thing when you're not really planning on doing it at all. So I don't know how much he wants to play those games, but it would be fine with me. And I can stand by everything we talked about on the radio this morning and talking about right now. But if Ryan Poles doesn't want to be publicly vague and privately supportive, and would rather be just publicly supportive as a rule, great, because then nobody would have any questions. And I don't think it would diminish the value of that pick that significantly, because the Texans need a quarterback, the Colts need a quarterback, other teams are going to need a quarterback, whether or not, regardless of what he says at all.
Yeah, right. And so it's going to be fascinating. One of the things I want to do some research on just for my own personal knowledge is when have these quarterback trades been made? What are the dates of that? So we can mark on our calendar, like, okay, earmark this week for when the Eagles went up for Carson Wentz and the Rams went up for Jared Goff, and the number of examples we've had in the last 10 years. When do those discussions sort of heat up to the point where they become action plans? Because that's an important thing. I wrote down in my notebook at the end of the Bears-Vikings game on Sunday afternoon, March 13th, save the date. That's the opening of the free agency negotiating period, right? That's when we're going to start to hear free agent contracts. April 27th, that's when the NFL draft begins. So those are two significant dates that we have to be aware of, that we're all leading up to, because we're really headed toward a 4-month stretch here that is going to be pivotal in determining the direction of this franchise, for better or for worse. And we won't know for a couple years exactly what direction they're headed in, but you'll start to have an idea of how much they're able to get done, what they're doing, and what their priorities and visions are. Yeah,
because there's big stories ahead and headlines to be written, and the Bears are going to be dominating the news cycle in the NFL for a while. Dominating might be a bit strong, but they will be in the middle of a lot of things. They need to hire a team president. They have $100 million in cap space. They have the number 1 pick of the draft, and then they have their typical off-season moves and news, and something will come up. So that alone makes the offseason arguably more entertaining, at least, and sort of as captivating as the past 4 months have been in this historically bad season.
By the way, in the last week plus that we've had conversations about the potential hiring of a team president, some of the buzz that I've gotten from within league circles about Kevin Warren and the interest level he has in the Bears job and the credentials that he would bring to the Bears job is really head turning, and it's eye opening to think it. I had one league source tell me, David, that presence is the word that he used at least a half dozen times to say that the minute that Kevin Warren takes over your football operation, you're going to feel presence. And it was think big energy was the other thing that they described as just like on an every single day basis, creating a think big energy within the building that inspires and motivates people who want to think big. There are people that don't want to think big, and the pressure will be too much for them, and it will be an enjoyable work experience. And that's part of what comes with being in a position like this, is to kind of sort that out. But to hear some folks that know well what Kevin would do if he were given a role like this, I mean, I'm telling you, it gives you an adrenaline surge, because you go, this is what we've been saying for years is what the Bears lack, right? Just this every single day, think big energy and ambition that can take this to a new stratosphere. So as we talk about everything that's going to happen in 2023, that's one of the first dominoes to fall.
Well, that would be an exciting one for the Bears in a coup, I think, because of reasons we've discussed before. I would just add to that, the other side of that equation would be the Big Ten Conference, and certainly the most lucrative rights deal ever struck, and Kevin Warren being at the forefront of that, and having UCLA and USC coming to the conference. As exciting and as great a spot that he would leave the Big Ten. From a couple people that I spoke to last week, again, different people, but I don't think there would be a lot of people trying to keep Kevin Warren in the job as Big Ten commissioner. And I don't want to overstate that, but I'm not sure that because he did such a good job, I'm still not sure it was the greatest fit. He may have been somebody who is more comfortable in a professional sports environment. And I think that him interviewing for the Bears job might reflect that, or at least it has been interpreted that way by some people, some of his constituents that in the Big Ten at the college level. So that wouldn't surprise me at all, Dan.
Yeah. And then one other thing that someone said to me in the last week and a half was that when Kevin talks to you, he wants to see that type A breath is coming out of your mouth, right? Like that's what kind of drives the ship and engines the whole thing. And so it'll be really interesting. And again, like we're going to get to January 2024 and look back on this year. I just recently did the top 10 significant dates of 2022 for the Chicago Bears, I think 2023 is going to be much grander in terms of significant events and significant moments that turn this franchise in one direction or another.
I would agree. And I think Sunday might be in that group because that was a pivotal day for the future. And so as the players back to Halas Hall started cleaning out their lockers and saying their goodbyes, Justin Jones was another entertaining interview. What did he have to say, and how did he incorporate the word grievance?
Yeah, well, look, like Justin has been one of the good talkers in that locker room all season. And again, it's a locker room full of them. And he was just pretty candid about, number one, saying, look, when people talk about what culture was established, he said internally in the locker room, it didn't feel like a 14-loss season because we've got guys in here who can grind and keep it fun and just keep everything humming at times when it may be difficult to do so. There's some value in that. But he also just was pretty forthright in saying, in these exit interview experiences, in these chances on the way out the door of Halas Hall for 2022 to express yourself to the coaches, that there were some concerns. And he used the word grievances and issues that players were able to bring up to the coaching staff. One of them being that he felt there needs to be more open lines of communication. And it was almost like when he was pressed on that by a couple of us, saying that, yeah, there's an open door policy between the players and coaches, but there's not always a reiteration that, hey, if there's anything on your mind, if there's any questions you have, if there's any frustrations you're feeling, if there's any curiosities of why we're doing X, Y, or Z, please come and talk to us and let's create this back and forth. And so it was really interesting to hear that out of a player's mouth. I mean, look, Matt Eberflus is in his first year in a new job, and I think he's open to constructive criticism, and hopefully he will take that constructively and say, okay, this is something in year one that maybe me and my staff didn't do a good enough job of doing if players are expressing this. But it was open and honest and forthright in saying, look, like, this isn't all rosy. You know, when you're 3-14, there are things that aren't all rosy. And it's been really easy to lose that in this season, particularly in a city that's been celebrating failure to the level that they've been celebrating failure.
I was glad to hear him say what he said. I'm not buying all this great culture that's been created. And if it is a great culture that's been created amidst this 10-game losing streak, I want to know what these guys are doing by not being more unhappy with it. This is the happiest 3-14 team in NFL history. But Justin Jones is pretty candid. I think he'll probably come back to play a role on next year's defense. How big of a role depends on what they do in free agency and in the draft, Dan.
Yeah.
But if you're prioritizing position groups, the front four or for the front seven, it's got to be near the top of the list, if not at the very top.
Yeah, front seven, offensive line, wide receiving core. They all need a complete overhaul. So get to work, Ryan Poles, and let's hear from him. Like, I'm most eager on Tuesday, David, to ask Ryan just kind of realistically with the resources he has available to him, what is he aiming to do and what does he think they can get done here in this next 4-month stretch? There's
been a crazy final week to the NFL regular season, and it was all in the context of Damar Hamlin going down on Monday Night Football, and he was resuscitated. Everybody knows the story. Everybody took a lot of took a lot of interest in his recovery, and the Bills taking the opening kickoff back for a touchdown was probably the play of week 18, and if not the season. So there's even more good news as Monday afternoon as we sit here, Dan. Damar Hamlin has been discharged from the hospital in Cincinnati, and that just keeps on getting better. And the Bills, there are two elements to this. Number one, the one everyone has been captivated by the past week, I think the human aspect of it we talked about in the Friday pod, but also as a football team, the Bills now, they're America's team, and you have to love the way that they have responded to this, and they're playing with a purpose, and you could see that. And obviously on Sunday.
Well, I was going to say sports documentarians better be getting to work right now because the 2022 Bills story, no matter how this season ends, is going to be one that is ultra compelling and truly riveting. And if it ends in a confetti shower at the Super Bowl, wonderful. If it ends with a loss in the AFC Championship game in overtime because Patrick Mahomes won the coin flip, then okay, maybe that's a situation too. By the way, that game would be at a neutral site. I don't know where. I don't know if they've announced where that game would be if the Bills and the Chiefs play in the AFC Championship. But, man, there's a lot ahead of the Bills. There's already a lot behind them, and the Hamlin situation has already been truly, truly captivating.
Why not Chicago? Why not Soldier Field? Has that been discussed? Has that been contemplated? It's a situation where if they need an outdoor venue if they need somewhere that both teams can get to easily. You would think that if Ford Field isn't interested and Indianapolis has a volleyball convention or whatever the fact may be. I love my Hoosier State, but come on. I mean, it's the NFL. Why not Chicago?
I don't know. I mean, people would probably bring up the historic tradition of the turf in the winter. I know they've changed surfaces, and it's held up pretty well here during a stretch where the Bears played, 4 of their last 5 games at home. I don't know.
I asked that because I didn't ask him, but on my way into the stadium on Sunday, ran into a good friend, Tim Lefevre, who is the general manager at Soldier Field. Have known him for a very long time, and he's always been terrific to deal with. Even when back in the day when I was criticizing the turf and took that as upon of an initiative to want to do things to Soldier Field and made fun of it. Tim Lefevre has not. He was proud of the fact that they have not received any complaints about Soldier Field surface this year. He was proud of the condition it was in January. And you look at it, Dan, they did it differently this year. They went to Carolina for the Bermuda grass, I believe. I'm not an expert, but I think they went a different route this year, and they were very pleased with it. So I would contend that if they wanted to have Soldier Field as a potential venue without knowing or having talked to anybody at this point, the condition of the field would not be a concern or as big of a concern as it has been in past years. I mean, listen,
I can tell you that the Wiederer family would be interested in attending that game if it was right down the road here. I've got a football obsessed, soon to be 10-year-old who loves these quarterbacks, and that'd be a pretty easy birthday gift this month if that was a decision that was made. And so yeah, we'll see what direction it goes.
Well, that sounds like a very good topic for the Mullen Haugh show. Maybe we can get the wheel turning here and maybe get things going. All right. So besides Justin Jones, besides Justin Fields, we're going to hear from Ryan Poles on Tuesday. Anything else at Halas Hall that happened on Monday, the day after the season, worth noting, Dan?
Yeah, it took about 5 minutes to talk to Cairo Santos for a few minutes to talk about his season. He expressed pretty, significant pride in finishing the year with a field goal percentage above 90%. Said that anytime you can do that in Chicago, it's an accomplishment and a testament to kind of being in the grind with Scales and Trent Gill and those guys that make that operation work. So Cairo went through his slump, obviously, in the middle of the year, and the extra point issues were enough that made him move from his comfort zone to a place that, in his words, he used to fear, kicking extra points from the middle of the field or kicking game-winning attempts from the middle of the field. And he feels like he found a comfort zone there that he's going to stick with as long as it's working. And you kind of zoom out on the turbulent year that Cairo Santos had, and you said, well, yeah, I mean, he steadied himself, finished the year making his last 8 kicks, 3 field goals and 5 extra points. And so I think he did kind of calm that situation down. The other thing I'd say, and I'd be interested to get your perspective on this, is I really just feel like 2023 is exciting, right? And for as much as you and I kind of dreaded parts and wrinkles of the 2022 experience because the big picture was lost at times, and I think everybody had a different big picture that they were seeing. And so it was like, okay, your big picture looks different than my big picture looks different than this person's big picture. 2023, we can't hide things. I think there's going to be a pretty valid eye test to a lot of different things. There's going to be an eye test on Justin Fields' growth as a quarterback. There's going to be an eye test on how good Ryan Poles is at acquiring talent and putting them in positions to be developed. There's going to be an eye test on whether the Bears are a team like the 2022 Lions, who are clearly on the rise and making strides, or whether they're just stuck like this franchise so often is. And so I'm really eager to do this calendar year. The last 4 months were weird, but this calendar year has got some excitement to it because I think it's going to be all right in front of our face, and there's not going to be so much wiggle room for what the interpretations are.
Those are great points, and I respect anybody that looks at it with excitement because they have the number 1 overall pick. They've got so much all this, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way at the risk of look. I honestly go into every season like that. I love football. I love football season. I really don't care. We're in a position because we're do the job the way we do the job. Objectivity allows you to just observe and not necessarily be a fan. Now, sometimes that's used against you, and I understand that and respect everybody looking at it differently. But Dan, I am excited about the next 12 months for the Bears because of what they are capable of doing with all the things that we've talked about. But I have to say this, go back 12 months. I was excited about the change that was ahead because they're going to hire a new coach, a new general manager. And before that, I mean, you're trained and you're conditioned to go into every season, every Sunday, every practice, you got to make it sound, you have to make it seem like it's the most interesting thing that you're covering that day, that year, that season. So this is a little bit different because they do have a lot of these distinctions, but I would hope that people would be that excited about every season, even though that's unrealistic. And that's why I think it has bothered me a little bit or a lot at times why this season wasn't viewed that way. It was dismissed as soon as it started. Winning didn't matter. It never. So it was almost like written off, sacrificed to the point of let's get on with things. When I think that,
but that didn't start. Honestly, that didn't start until the Robert Quinn trade. And that's really when it went off the rails, because at 3-4, people can use revisionist history all they want. At 3-4, with how plucky that team was and how plucky they had been in an undefeated preseason, when everyone said, "Boy, they make disciplined plays and they're right on top of the details at all times." There were people dreaming that this team could find a little bit of a moving walkway and get themselves to 7, 8, 9 wins and really change the direction of things. And then just to comfort themselves, there was like the Simone Biles mental gymnastics routine that went on for months and months and months in terms of what this was supposed to be and what it wasn't supposed to be.
Maybe you're right. But I also remember beating the 49ers in week 1 and, trying to find out how that was viewed. And then beating the Texans when Justin Fields struggled. And there was a large section of the fan base very disappointed in that victory because the quarterback didn't play well and there was still some uncertainty surrounding his future. So I think that it probably was in earnest after the Quinn trade, certainly after Roquan Smith was dealt. They haven't won since. But I do think that entering the season, there was this hope and there was this expectation that this season didn't matter as much as next season will, as much as last season might have. And I don't really, I object to the notion, I always will object to the notion that no season, that any season should be just dismissed. I'm going to quote Theo Epstein. He came here in October 2011 in Chicago. Different sport, same idea. And I know that Theo tanked intentionally, and you know what? He got away with it. But he said every season is sacred. He sounded like a hypocrite in 2012 and 2013, but it worked. But I still am a sucker. Every season is sacred, and the Bears just blew one. That's okay. They better take advantage of it. But every season is sacred in the NFL, and I just think that this one will go down in the record books as being the worst one ever at Halas Hall.
Well, and look, like 5 years from now, what this season was and wasn't will be a lot more clear than it is now, right? Like I think that will be obvious to everyone. One and a half last thoughts from me. I want it to be pretty clear that what Justin Fields showed within his second season here is that he has the talent, the athleticism, the aptitude, and the leadership ability to have the potential to be the best quarterback the Chicago Bears franchise has ever had. I think he has all of those things to become a great NFL quarterback, a potential Pro Bowler if he wants. He's not there yet, and he's got strides and boxes he needs to check to continue climbing that ladder. I think he's got it all within him to take the best swing possible at climbing that ladder and getting to where people want him to go. I'm just a wait and see guy, and so I'd like to see more. And I hope that a larger segment of the audience, listen, I know there is a segment of the audience, particularly the loyal, fun, knowledgeable listeners to the Take the North podcast, that understand that you don't need to be allergic to criticizing a historically bad passing offense. Right? Historically bad. I gave you some of the numbers on Sunday night that in the last 25 years, 795 NFL teams have played a season of football, and only 5 have had a worse passing yards per game average than the Chicago Bears. Historically bad. And so there's a pie chart at Halas Hall that needs to be broken up by Matt Eberflus and Luke Getsy and Ryan Poles. Is it the offensive line? Is it the talent? Is it the receiving core? Is it the play calling? Is it the system? Is it the quarterback? Is it other? And the distribution of that pie is going to be interesting, but I can tell you that the quarterback slice is in that pie. And I hope people realize that there's not anything more to saying that than just an objective analysis of what this offense is and where it needs to go. I believe strongly in the opportunity that Justin Fields has ahead of him. I hope the Bears don't squander it like they've squandered a lot of other opportunities in their history. We'll see which direction it goes. I just wanted to say that as we kind of put a little bit of a bow. I know we'll be talking more about Fields in the coming days, but just on his second season.
Yeah, well put. I think that's really well put, and I think some people maybe needed to hear that. But yeah, Ryan Poles goes to the gets behind the microphone on Tuesday morning, I think there's a lot of expectations based on what he's going to say. I think a lot of people might be disappointed because I don't know that he's going to create that as big of a headlines as maybe we think. He's going to be very reserved, I would expect, and the support that he expresses for Justin Fields, I think, will be qualified the way it has been to this point. He needs to progress, certain things he needs to improve, but I just don't know that we're going to get the voila moment that we know everything is going to happen in the next month or so, or the next 6 months or so. But I'm looking forward to that nonetheless.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And the last thing for me today is just as I walked out of Soldier Field on Sunday night, I took a moment. Last game of my 10th season, David, and I bring this up now because I can vividly remember a summer day in August 2023 when I was a candidate to become a Bears writer at the Chicago Tribune, and coming home and going out for a little run and coming back and seeing on my phone I had voice messages from you and Big Z. And it let me know that I was a serious candidate for that job. And so you have this reflection on how fast 10 years have gone, and just how lucky we are. As fed up as we get with people at times, as hard as it is to cover losing, that there's a level of gratitude that I've never taken a day for granted on this beat, and what this beat means to this city and what this football team and the passion of the people that follow it truly is. And so it was just, I just took an extra 10 seconds on the way out of Soldier Field to stand in that northwest corner on the way out to the north garage and take a picture of that field and just realize, man, this is pretty cool. And I know you've been around it longer and you've done a lot more things, but just a moment of reflection after a decade of covering this football team.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it is a great awareness. That's nice for you to say that, and it's nice for you to recognize that, because we do maybe take it for granted a little bit. It also was the end of the 20th season covering the Bears, and the WBBM's 22nd season of doing Bears games on WBBM, end of an era. And it was my last pregame hit for that pregame show with Ron, Jim, and Jay. It's a great group. Jeff and Tom and Doug Coletti, they do a terrific job, and they're going to be missed. But yeah, I was walking out of there yesterday with similar. I mean, at the last game of every season, I don't travel anymore, but you do get the sense that you're lucky to do what we do. And Dan, your little anecdote about getting voicemail messages 10 years ago from Biggs and somebody out there in our Take the North audience is just saying, yeah, I knew those three guys have been friends for a long time because they all think alike.
Well, I didn't even know Rich Campbell at that point and met him a few weeks after that. And
crazy?
I mean, yeah, it is. And like, look, I remember just calling you back and being like, oh my God, like I'm actually a legitimate candidate to go back to Chicago and be a Bears writer at the Tribune. And David's kind of given me the lay of the land, and it was a cool moment for a guy on the climb.
One of these podcasts in the off season, we should bring in Mike Kellums, and we can tell the real story behind the pursuit of a Dan Wiederer and Rich Campbell, because those were some real fun moments back in, I think that was 10 years ago. Exactly. So yeah, I look forward to that potential. We can do that. All right. We are out of time now. What else do you have to say?
No, that's it. I'm not going to take any more.
We got a lot of stuff to do. We have a lot of things to say, and we'll be back tomorrow because Ryan Poles, he has a lot to say as well, the Bears general manager. All right. So we are going to drop this on Tuesday morning, and then we're going to be back on Wednesday morning and again later this week. For Dan Wiederer and Adam Stadzinski, thank you to Rich Campbell for joining us on the Take the North podcast. You can get it on your Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts, and certainly watch on the YouTube channel for 670 The Score. Thanks for listening.
Great talk. See you out there.